So, many people want to know, well, where did this idea of church come from that we have big buildings and pulpits for the pastor to speak from and pews for people to sit in? Actually, that idea of church did not come, of course, from the Bible. It did not come from the Bible. In fact, it was at least 300 years after the Bible was written, in the time of Constantine in Rome, when things changed. Constantine wanted the church to be under the administration of the government. Constantine wanted the church to be under the administration of the government, and so he orchestrated the building of larger buildings to have the Christians come and gather in those larger buildings, where he could appoint bishops and others to oversee and govern others within the church. So he was actually trying to control the church and bring it under human control, which kept it from being a movement. And so large buildings were constructed. Christians began to come in once a week. They would have bishops to oversee and rule over them. Later on, they put pews for people to sit in, and they raised up pulpits for the bishop to speak from. And so Christians learned over the years to come and sit in these buildings. And the church stopped being this movement of disciple makers. Instead, the church became a place and a building for people to come and sit. And so that has carried on for so long. But God is doing something new again today as He reminds us what church really is. He reminds us that church is the people of God who are going out and reaching people and making disciples and drawing those people into gatherings wherever they are so that they can invite their friends in and they can become disciples and disciple makers who then go out and reach others. And so the church becomes the people of God going and going and going. New gatherings are forming here. New church gatherings are forming there. And the gospel just goes out in incredible ways. That is the way God designed His church to be. And so in Acts 1, He said, you guys will be my witnesses here in Jerusalem, but also Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world. Because the plan for the church was for it to go out further and farther and farther and reach more people here and there so the whole world would be reached. But in Acts, those early disciples in Jerusalem, they still wanted to kind of stay home. So they stayed in Jerusalem. They didn't go much farther at the beginning until Acts 8, and God sent a persecution to help them get out of Jerusalem and take the gospel farther out and out and out, because that is God's plan for His church, His people who are filled with the Spirit, to keep going, making new disciples, gather in new places with people who will then go and make more disciples. And so we get this going and multiplying church. It's a wonderful, wonderful vision that God has for us as His people. But we have learned over the years that church is a building, and so we just try to box everything into a building, and we no longer have a movement. So, the biblical idea of church, that's what we must understand. The biblical idea of church, it's the people who follow Jesus, who continue to go and multiply. So what we have is a movement of disciple makers who are going and making disciples. That's actually what the church is, because we are the church. The people of God are the church. So in our old idea of church, there's a building that we invite people into. A building we invite people into. Our new idea of church from the Bible is Matthew 28, where people go, they make disciples, they teach them to obey, they baptize them, they gather them together, they send them out. That's the way the New Testament church looks. Now I'm going to show that to you again. Many groups that we work with even use hand motions to remind ourselves what this obedient church looks like, based on Matthew 28. And so, this Matthew 28 church, we need to get in our mind, what does it look like? The old idea of church, we know, it looks like a building that we invite people into. Well, what does the new idea look like? It looks like Matthew 28. And so it looks like this. It looks like go. And so you'll see, now you don't have to use these exact hand motions, but we find it's helpful for people to put some hand motions to this Matthew 28 idea of church so that we can remember it well and share it with others. So here is the Matthew 28 understanding of what church is. It is the people of God who go, make disciples. This is, we're walking alongside of somebody while they learn to be a follower of Jesus. So we go, make disciples. We then teach them to obey. So that's how we do, teach them to obey. Starting with baptism. Yeah, you see that's baptism. And then we gather them together in groups for worship and prayer and Bible study. And then we send them out so that they are also going to make disciples. So there's 5 parts. I'll give it to you again. The people of God, this is the church, the people of God, they go, they make disciples, they teach those disciples to obey, starting with baptism, then they gather them together and send them out. And when they do that, then those disciples will also, what? Go, of course, and make disciples. And teach those people to obey, starting with baptism, gathering them together, and then sending them out. I'm going to do this once more because I know you're watching me, but you haven't actually done it with your own hands yet. So I'm going to invite you to use your own hands with me. The Church of Jesus Christ, according to Matthew 28, it's the people of God filled with the Holy Spirit. And they go, and they make disciples, and they teach the disciples to obey, starting with baptism, and then they gather them together for fellowship and prayer and the Word, and then they send them out to go and do the same. That is the pattern for the New Testament church that we will be discussing more and more as this course continues.